Our story begins in the middle of the night, when a young boy woke up to use the restroom and was bitten by a white snake. In a fit of pain, he grabbed a kitchen knife, ready to chop the creature into pieces. But to his utter shock, the white snake transformed into a beautiful young girl. She spoke in a human voice, explaining that she had been injured by a villain while attempting to transform into a dragon. She made him a curious offer. If he helped heal her wounds, she would become his wife when he grew up. A fair trade, perhaps, in the logic of a fairy tale. Struck by her breathtaking beauty, he impulsively agreed to her request. Without a second thought, he tucked her into his pocket and secretly brought her back home. The next morning, however, the village chief arrived at his house with a frantic crowd. They asked his grandfather if he had seen a white snake lurking nearby. The chief warned that this snake was a failed dragon, a creature of ill omen that would bring ruin to everyone in the village. Eavesdropping behind the door, the boy felt a surge of pure terror. Panicked, he quickly stuffed the snake into his trousers to hide her. Just as he finished, his grandfather led the search party into his room, asking if he had seen any snakes. His heart hammered against his ribs. At that very moment, the white snake was hiding right inside his pants, her cold, slick scales pressing firmly against his skin. He knew that if his grandfather discovered her, he would likely be beaten to death on the spot. Fortunately, after a quick inspection, the old man found nothing unusual. Once the group finally left, the boy leaned against the cold door, his legs feeling as weak as soggy noodles. He slowly slid down the wood until he hit the floor. With a trembling voice, he whispered to the white snake hidden in his clothes, his words barely louder than a mosquito's buzz. He told her the coast was clear and she could come out. Immediately, a snow-white snake slithered out from the cuff of his trousers. Her scales shimmered like pearls in the morning light filtering through the window. Her slit-like eyes stared at him without blinking. Then, in the blink of an eye, a thick white mist rose up and enveloped her slender form. As the mist cleared, the beautiful girl from the night before stood there once again. She looked just as radiant as he remembered, despite her ordeal. She wore a simple white dress made of a material that looked like fine silk, yet it possessed an otherworldly glow that didn't seem to belong to this realm. Her face was so pale it was almost translucent, and those beautiful eyes were clouded with a layer of deep, unshakable exhaustion. To be honest, she looked quite fragile. A faint trace of blood remained at the corner of her mouth, and her usually straight back was slightly hunched. It was clear she was severely injured as she reached out for support. She leaned against a nearby table and coughed softly, her brow furrowed in pain. She looked at the boy with a hint of apology in her eyes and thanked him for his help. The boy stared at her, his mind a chaotic mess. He couldn't stop thinking about the chief's warning that a failed dragon would bring death to the entire village. Yet, he also remembered her promise to be his wife, and the lingering, icy sensation of her scales against his skin. It was, all things considered, a very complicated morning. His face flushed hot with a mix of panic and confusion. He blurted out the question, asking what she really was and mentioning the chief's warning about the failed dragon. He told her the chief said she would bring ruin to the entire village. At those words, the apology on her face vanished instantly, her eyes darkening with a heavy shadow. Within her gaze, we see a swirling storm of emotions, anger, grievance, and a trace of bottomless cold. She didn't answer his question directly, however. Instead, she simply turned toward the window, looking out at the village. She whispered that they understood nothing, her words light, yet carrying a strange weight. Those words hit him like a stone, leaving him even more unsettled. Our protagonist is Gooden, a 13-year-old boy born and raised in Soalong village. The village is hidden deep within the mountains, surrounded on all sides, with the imposing Black Dragon Mountain looming right behind it. For generations, the villagers lived off the land, and while they were poor, life was stable. His parents had left to find work when he was very young. They hadn't returned in years, so he lived with his grandfather. Now, his grandfather was the most respected elder in the village, and for good reason. It wasn't just his age, he was well-versed in the ways of yin and yang. Whenever there was a wedding, a funeral, or a brush with the supernatural, people sought him out. Growing up, the warning he heard most often was never to go to Black Dragon Mountain and never to touch the snakes there, especially the white ones. His grandfather claimed something was locked inside that mountain, and that white snakes were omens of calamity that had to be killed on sight. Otherwise, they would bring total destruction to the village. He used to think these were just scary stories, but the chief's arrival that morning changed everything. The chief and the village men said exactly what his grandfather always had. They claimed a failed dragon had escaped from Black Dragon Mountain. This creature supposedly carried a murderous aura so great that if it wasn't killed, everyone in Soalong village would be dead within 3 days. Eavesdropping behind the door, Gooden was scared out of his wits. He never imagined the beautiful girl he had hidden was the very creature they sought. Yet, looking at her now, so weak she looked as if a breeze might knock her over, he began to have his doubts. To be honest, she didn't look like a monster. How could this fragile girl be a bringer of doom? She hadn't even fought back when he chased her with a kitchen knife earlier that night. Even when the search party was in the room, she had remained perfectly still. If she were truly a terrifying dragon, would she really be this pathetic? As these thoughts raced through his mind, she suddenly began to cough violently. Her body swayed, and she spat a mouthful of blood directly onto the floor. The blood wasn't a normal red. It shimmered with a faint golden hue. As it hit the stone, it instantly hissed, corroding a small pit into the hard surface. Startled, Gooden rushed over to support her. As she leaned against him, she looked up with a gaze filled with a complex swirl of emotions. She explained that at the critical moment of her transformation, someone pierced her dragon core with a soul-suppressing nail. If she hadn't escaped, she'd be dead. When he asked who had done such a thing, she simply shook her head, a flash of resentment flickering within her amber-colored eyes. She didn't know the woman's identity because of her mask, but she could smell the earthy scent of Sualong village and the bloodline of a guardian. The term guardian was one Gooden knew all too well. Years ago, while rummaging through his grandfather's old wooden chest, he had found something. It was a rusty bronze plaque engraved with those very words. When he had shown it to his grandfather, the reaction was entirely unexpected. His grandfather had exploded in a rare fit of rage, scolding him harshly before locking the plaque away in the deepest part of the chest. Could the person who attacked her actually be his grandfather? The mere thought made the hair on Gooden's neck stand up in pure terror. He told himself it was impossible. His grandfather was the kindest man he knew, a man who spent his life helping others. Why would he hurt anyone? The talk of dragon cores seemed absurd, yet the girl didn't look like she was lying. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the courtyard. Gooden turned pale with fright. He pushed her away, frantically whispering for her to hide, because his grandfather had finally returned home. The girl remained strangely calm. However, she looked at the door and softly remarked that there was no need to hide, as he already knew she was there. Gooden was on the verge of tears, certain that if his grandfather had known earlier, he would have been in serious trouble. Then, the door creaked open. His grandfather stood in the doorway, clutching his tobacco pipe, his clothes still damp with the morning dew from his long trek. His wrinkled face was as dark as the bottom of a coal pot. His clouded eyes scanned the room before finally settling on the girl in white. He gripped his pipe so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Gooden felt his heart leap into his throat. He had never seen his grandfather look so terrifying. The old man looked as if he might snap at any moment. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence where every breath felt like a thunderclap. Though his back was drenched in cold sweat and his legs were shaking, Gooden stood firmly in front of the girl, refusing to move an inch. He expected his grandfather to draw a wooden sword and strike, but instead, the old man looked away and let out a heavy, soul-weary sigh. It was a sound of infinite exhaustion, as if a lifetime of burdens was finally crushing him. He looked at the boy and simply whispered, "Gooden." His grandfather's voice was incredibly raspy as he asked if Gooden knew the trouble he'd caused. Gooden swallowed hard, his own voice trembling as he called out to him. He insisted she wasn't a bad person, just injured. But his grandfather's voice suddenly rose, demanding if he knew she was a spirit snake attempting to transform into a dragon. He reminded the boy that Sualong village was no ordinary place. It was the very heart of the seal that kept the dragons bound. We see the girl glance back before stepping out from behind Gooden. She looked the old man in the eye without a hint of fear and addressed him as Qinshui. She called him the 12th generation guardian and told him to stop deceiving children. She claimed he knew better than anyone what the town was truly locking away. She explained her transformation wasn't meant to break the seal, but to strengthen it. She then accused him of failing to notice someone tampering with the seal right under his nose. The grandfather's expression shifted instantly. He stared at her intensely, demanding to know what she meant. The girl took a step forward, her voice turning cold. She revealed that while she was transforming at the dragon pond, someone pierced her dragon core with a soul-suppressing nail, someone carrying the scent of a guardian. Since the guardian bloodline of Sualong village belonged solely to the Qin family, she demanded to know who else besides him carried that specific blood. The grandfather's body swayed violently, and his tobacco pipe fell to the floor with a heavy thud. He stared at the girl, his face a whirlwind of shifting emotions. For a long time, he was speechless. Finally, he began to mutter that it was impossible, as the guardian bloodline was only passed down to a single male in each generation. He explained that his father only had him. He only had Gooden's father, and Gooden's father only had Gooden. It was a simple, unbroken line. Aside from the three of them, no one else could possibly have the Qin blood. That was when the girl suddenly asked, "What about Gooden's father?" The question hit a nerve. The grandfather's face darkened instantly, and he slammed his hand on the table, shouting for her not to mention that unfilial son. Gooden felt his heart sink. His memories of his father were a blur. He and Gooden's mother had left to find work when the boy was only 5 years old. At first, they sent money and called every year, but those contacts became rarer and rarer. For the last 3 years, there had been nothing but silence. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Gooden had tried to ask his grandfather about it many times. Each time, the old man would start to speak, only to fall silent again, unable to find the right words. Finally, with a heavy, weary sigh and a wave of his hand, the grandfather dropped a bombshell. "He's dead." Which, as you can imagine, changed everything. Gooden froze, his mind going completely blank. Despite having so few memories of his father, he had always lived under the assumption that the man was still out there. He had always believed his father would return from working away one day, but now his grandfather claimed he was dead. With a trembling voice, Gooden asked how it happened. The old man revealed that 3 years ago, his father secretly entered Black Dragon Mountain and tampered with the seal's foundation, only to be killed by the formation's backlash. His grandfather's voice was eerily calm, yet we can see his hands shaking as he spoke. He reminded Gooden he'd warned him countless times never to touch that seal. It was because of this very danger that his father, who refused to listen and insisted on venturing there, ultimately lost his life. Gooden was left utterly stunned. The revelation that his father had tampered with the seal and died from the backlash raised a chilling question. Could his father be the one who attacked the girl? But if his grandfather said he was dead, could he still be alive? The mere thought made the hair on Gooden's neck stand up, and that was when the shouting began. Suddenly, a chaotic din of yelling and the sounds of panicked animals erupted from outside. Someone began frantically pounding on their front door. A voice strained with urgency called out for Old Man Chun, shouting that something terrible had happened. Both the grandfather and the girl turned pale at once. The grandfather quickly snatched his pipe from the floor and told Gooden in a low, stern voice to hide the girl and stay put, no matter what happened outside. Gooden nodded quickly, pulling the girl toward the space under the bed. It was cluttered with old junk, but it was just enough room to hide the two of them. Just as they crawled inside, the grandfather opened the door and stepped out, locking it behind him, which, to be honest, didn't do much to calm Gooden's nerves. He and the girl were squeezed together in the cramped, narrow space under the bed. Her body was pressed tightly against his as they both held their breath, listening intently to the commotion unfolding just outside the room. The grandfather asked what the panic was about, and the man at the door cried out that something had happened at Old Wang's house on the west side of the village. The man's voice shook with a sob as he explained that a yard full of chickens had been found dead, their blood completely drained from their bodies. Their necks were marked with 2 small holes, looking exactly like a snake bite. Gooden's heart sank, and he instinctively glanced at the girl beside him. Her brow was furrowed, a look of deep gravity flashing in her amber eyes. She shook her head gently and mouthed the words, "It wasn't me." The voices outside continued to multiply as more villagers joined in, their words a messy blur of pure, unadulterated panic. It wasn't just the chickens. Old Lee's cow at the east end of the village was dead too, drained of blood with a strange hole in its belly. Even the well water was ruined. When the villagers went to draw water that morning, it had turned a murky, reddish color that smelled faintly of blood. The stench of blood and decay convinced the villagers that the rebellious dragon was responsible. The village chief declared that this creature was here to destroy them all. As soon as those words were spoken, the crowd outside erupted into a frenzy. Everyone began shouting, demanding the white snake be killed, and Gooden's heart leaped into his throat. His palms were slick with sweat. The space under the bed was so cramped that he and the girl were pressed together, and he could feel her body trembling. Her breathing grew rapid and shallow. She leaned close to his ear, her voice a mere breath as she whispered that something was wrong. The seal had loosened. She explained that the evil energy of the Black Jiao was leaking out. Before Gooden could ask what a Black Jiao was, the village chief's booming voice shook the courtyard. The chief shouted for Old Man Chun, telling him he must have heard that the dragon was already killing. He demanded the old man tell them the truth. He asked if the white snake was hiding in the house, insisting that if they handed it over, they could kill it and save the village. To protect it, he claimed, was a death sentence. If they kept hiding it, the entire village would be buried alongside it. Nonsense, the grandfather roared back, his voice filled with a lifetime of authority as the village guardian. He argued that he would never hide something that could harm the village, insisting there was no white snake and accusing them of making baseless claims. No snake? The chief sneered. The chief reminded him that during the morning search, the grandfather had entered his grandson's room alone for a long time, only to come out and say nothing was there. He questioned if the old man had hidden it then, warning him not to be foolish enough to trade the lives of the entire village for a mere beast. The grandfather's voice was like iron as he repeated that there was nothing to find. He told them to search again if they didn't believe him, but there would be a price. He demanded they apologize to the Chun family and his grandson if they found nothing. Outside, a heavy silence fell. Under the bed, Gooden felt his heart nearly stop. He gripped the girl's hand. It was ice-cold but remarkably steady. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his and gently tapping the back of his hand. It was a silent gesture of comfort. After a long pause, the village chief's voice rang out again, now carrying a chilling, sinister undertone. He agreed to trust the old man one last time, but issued a grim warning. If anything else happened in the village, the Chun family would be held responsible. Whether the snake was there or not didn't matter. As the village guardian, if he couldn't suppress the evil, he would have to pay with his own life. The crowd eventually left, grumbling and cursing as they went. Gooden and the girl finally exhaled in relief and crawled out from beneath the bed. Drenched in sweat and with legs too weak to stand, Gooden sat on the edge of the bed. With a trembling voice, he asked her what the Black Jiao really was. He begged her to explain the seal and what was actually happening. The girl walked to the window, her gaze fixed on the village outside, silent and grave. She stared into the distance for a long time before turning back to look at Gooden, finally beginning to tell him a secret he had never known. It was the true story of Swalong Village. As it turned out, their home was no ordinary settlement. The very land beneath their feet was a sacred site. 1,000 years ago, a powerful master established the Sualong Formation here to imprison a black jiao, a malevolent creature that had cultivated for 3 millennia. This black jiao was naturally cruel, causing bloody storms and devastating floods throughout the region while devouring countless innocent lives. The master, unable to bear the people's suffering, set the Sualong Formation to seal the black jiao deep within the dragon pool beneath Black Dragon Mountain. He left behind a lineage of guardians to protect the seal for generations. And as for the girl, we learn that her name is Baisushi. She wasn't a rebellious dragon at all, but the manifestation of the formation's spiritual pulse. For the seal to remain effective, it required her spiritual power. Every 100 years, this spiritual pulse takes form, using the aura of the dragon pool to transform into a dragon, a perfectly natural cycle of renewal. Each transformation injects new strength into the Sualong Formation, reinforcing the seal to ensure the black jiao remains locked underground forever. This year happened to be the centennial mark. She was in the middle of her transformation when, at the most critical moment, someone suddenly broke in. They used a soul-slaying nail coated in the black jiao's essence blood to pierce her dragon core, violently interrupting her transformation process. With her last bit of strength, she escaped the dragon pool and stumbled into the village, where she ran into Gooden during his late-night bathroom trip. The blood on the nail was specifically designed to corrode her spiritual essence. With her core pierced, 90% of her power had already dissipated. She couldn't hold on much longer. Baisushi looked at him, a trace of helplessness flickering in her amber eyes as she explained the situation. The blood of a guardian was the only thing that could purify the evil energy and nourish her core. She hadn't bitten him to harm him, but to form a blood bond. She needed his lineage's power to preserve her soul. Gooden asked what that meant, remembering his grandfather's warning that if she died, he would too. Baisushi nodded, hiding nothing. Once the blood bond was formed, their lives were tied together. They would live or die as one. If her dragon core shattered, his soul would also scatter. However, she assured him that if she completed her transformation, she could fix everything. She promised that not only would she break the bond, but she would ensure he lived a long, peaceful life. "I keep my word," she added softly. As she spoke the final words, promising to be his wife when he grew up, her cheeks flushed red, leaving Gooden's heart racing once again. Gooden's face burned with embarrassment as he quickly looked away, though a lingering doubt in his mind forced him to speak. He asked who had attacked her, noting that while she sensed a guardian's bloodline, his grandfather claimed only the two of them remained. It couldn't have been him or his grandfather. So who was it? Baisushi's brow furrowed again as she slowly shook her head. She didn't know. She only smelled the scent of guardian blood mixed with the black jiao's malice, and the man wore a mask. However, she was certain he was hiding in Sualong village, and that he was the one behind the dead livestock and the tainted well. He was inciting the villagers to force Gooden to hand her over. A chill ran through the boy's heart as he realized the truth. The person who ambushed Baisushi was hiding among them, perhaps even someone they knew personally. To be honest, it was a terrifying thought. By killing the livestock and framing her, the culprit intended to make the villagers hate her enough to demand her execution. But what was his goal? If she died, the Sualong Formation would fail, and the seal would loosen completely, just as she said. The black jiao would break free. Why would anyone want that? Just as Gooden was struggling to understand, the door creaked open. His grandfather, Chen Shui, walked in, looking as though he had aged 10 years in a single night, his hair noticeably whiter. He sat at the table and looked at them, his voice rasping as he asked if someone with guardian blood truly tampered with the seal. Baisushi nodded, confirming that the soul-slaying nail bore the unmistakable mark of a guardian's bloodline alongside the jiao's essence. She asked Shui if, in all his years of guarding the town, he had never noticed that the formation's foundation had been compromised. The old man's body shuddered. He admitted he had noticed the spiritual energy shifting 3 years ago as the mountain's malice grew. He had spent 3 years inspecting every inch of the Sualong Formation's foundation, yet he had found absolutely nothing out of place. He had assumed the seal was simply weakening naturally after a century, never imagining someone was sabotaging it from the shadows. Baisushi then asked if he ever suspected anyone else in the village might carry the guardian bloodline. Shui shook his head firmly. He insisted it was impossible, as the Chun family bloodline was passed to only one heir per generation. There were no others. Then she asked a question that hit like a stone in a still pond. Have you considered that Chun Mo might not be dead? Shui's face instantly flushed a deep crimson as he slammed his hand onto the table, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at Baisushi while shouting that she was talking nonsense. He insisted that he had seen the body carried out of the mountains with his own eyes, his bones shattered by the formation's backlash. It was simply impossible for him to be alive. Baisushi looked up at him, her gaze searching and analytical, as she reminded Shui that after a lifetime of guarding this place, he should know the truth better than anyone. The black jiao's malice can create illusions and even alter a person's appearance. She asked him if he was truly certain that the body he saw back then was Chinemo. The old man's body swayed as his lips moved soundlessly, unable to find words for a long moment, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt appeared in his eyes. Gooden sat nearby, his mind a tangled mess of confusion, wondering if his father really could be alive, and if so, where he had been all these years. He wondered whose body had been carried out of the mountains, and if the person who ambushed by Sushi was actually his father. Just then, a heart-wrenching scream erupted from outside. It was more urgent and panicked than the cries from that morning, laced with a sobbing terror as someone shouted that a person had died. The voice begged for Old Man Chen to come quickly, crying out that Lu San was dead and that his end had been truly gruesome. Gooden's heart tightened at the news. Lu San was the village bachelor who lived at the edge of town. He was a bit of a loafer, but he wasn't a bad man, and he often gave Gooden candy when they met. Shiyi's face turned deathly pale as he stood up abruptly and hurried toward the door. Gooden moved to follow him, but he was stopped. Bai Sushi grabbed his arm and shook her head with a solemn expression, warning him that it wasn't safe because the culprit was out there waiting for them to show themselves. Gooden stopped in his tracks and watched from the window as the village descended into chaos, filled with a cacophony of cries, screams, and angry shouts. From his vantage point, he could see many villagers running toward the edge of town, their faces twisted with a level of panic he had never seen before. It was as if they had witnessed something utterly horrific. About an hour later, Shiyi returned, and the sight of him gave Gooden a genuine shock. The old man's face was as white as paper and his entire body was trembling, his clothes stained with mud and the faint, metallic scent of blood. Gooden rushed over to support his grandfather, asking him what had happened to Lu San. Shiyi looked at him with a look of pure terror that Gooden had never witnessed. His lips quivered for a long time before he managed to choke out that the body was covered in black scales, exactly like the victims from 50 years ago. The mention of 50 years ago made Gooden look toward Bai Sushi, whose expression had also turned incredibly grim as she took a step forward. Her voice was tight with tension as she asked if he meant the time when the seal first loosened, and the old man slowly nodded his head in confirmation. His voice was incredibly raspy as he recalled that 50 years ago, when the seal on Zwolong town first loosened, the Black Jiao's malice leaked out into the village. 17 people died in just half a month, all in that same gruesome state, until finally, his father, Gooden's great-grandfather, risked everything he had. Using his own blood to mark the formation, he managed to reinforce the seal and save the village. Having said this, Shiyi looked at Bai Sushi with a trace of despair. He begged her to tell him exactly how much the seal had weakened and if the Black Jiao was truly about to break free. To be honest, he dreaded the answer. Bai Sushi remained silent for a long time before slowly explaining that when the soul-suppressing nail pierced her dragon core, she felt the seal crack open. If she couldn't complete the dragon painting to reinforce the seal within 3 days, the Black Jiao would undoubtedly break out and destroy everything. At that point, not a single living soul within 100 miles would survive. With only 3 days left, the room suddenly fell into a deathly silence. We see Gooden looking from his grandfather to Bai Sushi, his mind a complete mess. He was, after all, only a 13-year-old boy. He had never imagined that one day, the lives of the entire village would rest squarely on his shoulders. After a long while, Shiyi finally looked up. His gaze had become incredibly determined as he agreed to help her, promising anything she needed as long as she could save the village and his grandson. Bai Sushi nodded at the old man and listed 3 requirements, starting with the bloodline of the town guardian, which meant she needed Gooden's blood. She needed it to purify the malice on the soul-suppressing nail and repair her dragon core. Secondly, she required the Chun family's ancestral guardian token. Only with that token could she open the dragon pool's formation, allowing her to enter and finally complete the sacred dragon painting. Thirdly, she needed them to hold off the villagers and the person who ambushed her. She just needed 3 days to recover her strength and finish the task. She agreed without a second thought, offering the guardian token immediately and promising that Gooden's blood was hers to use as needed. As long as it didn't kill the boy, she could have what she required, while he would handle the villagers and the mastermind behind the scenes. He vowed to buy her those 3 days, even if it cost him his old life. Gooden cried out to him in worry, and the old man turned to look at him. He reached out to pat Gooden's head with a faint smile, one filled with endless tenderness and a hint of a resolve that the boy couldn't yet understand. He told Gooden that as a descendant of the Chun family and the 13th generation guardian, his duty wasn't just to a piece of wood or a cold formation. It was to the people of this village and their home. He reminded the boy that while he had always protected him in the past, things were changing. He told the boy it was now his turn to carry the burden. Gooden felt a lump in his throat and, fighting back tears, he nodded firmly. He promised his grandfather he wasn't afraid and would stay with them. Shiyi simply smiled, then went to a wooden chest he never allowed the boy to touch. From the very bottom, he pulled out an object wrapped in red cloth, along with a peachwood sword, a bagua mirror, and several yellow talismans. He carefully unwrapped the red cloth to reveal a palm-sized copper medallion. It was an ancient piece, heavily weathered and covered in layers of rust. The metal bore the marks of many generations, showing just how long this burden had been passed down through their family line. Shiyi told her to take it, for with this, she could finally harness the power of the dragon-locking formation. Bai Sushi took the token, her fingers tracing the metal. A flicker of complex emotion crossed her eyes as she looked at the old man and gave a solemn nod of thanks. But then, the courtyard gate shuddered. A violent pounding erupted, far more aggressive than that morning, accompanied by a chorus of angry shouts and curses from the mob outside. The entire courtyard seemed to tremble under the noise. The village chief's booming voice thundered over the rest, demanding that Chen Shui open the door immediately. He shouted that Lu San was dead and blamed the rebellious dragon hidden in the house. He warned that if the white snake wasn't handed over, they would use fire. The mob threatened to burn the house down with the grandfather, the boy, and the dragon all inside. They screamed for blood and vengeance for Lu San. The cries grew louder. Burn the house. Kill the dragon. Don't let them destroy the whole village. It was a terrifying wave of collective panic. Their shouts were fueled by a volatile mix of rage and pure terror. Gooden turned pale with fear, clutching tightly to the corner of his grandfather's clothes. Shui shielded the boy behind him and gripped his peachwood sword. With a calm face, he told Bai Sushi to take Gooden and escape through the back. He instructed them to crawl through the small opening in the back wall and head for the dragon pool on Black Dragon Mountain while he held the line. He reminded her she had only 3 days to complete the painting. Gooden burst into tears, refusing to leave his grandfather behind to face the mob alone. Shui spun around, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a desperate intensity. He told the boy he had to go, as he was the last root of the Qin family. He was the only one who could help Bai Sushi. If he died here, the village was truly doomed. The old man reached out to wipe away the boy's tears. His voice softened as he called Gooden's name, admitting that he hadn't been a man of great skill or many accomplishments in his long life. He promised that when the boy returned, he would make his favorite brown sugar rice cakes. Gooden couldn't stop crying as Bai Sushi stepped toward him. She took the boy's hand and gave Shui a firm nod, her voice steady as she promised to protect Gooden with her life. She vowed that within 3 days, she would complete the painting and reinforce the seal. Shui smiled, turned, and gripped his peachwood sword. He strode toward the courtyard gate as the pounding grew deafening, the wood beginning to splinter and sway under the mob's assault. Before the door could give way, Bai Sushi pulled Gooden toward the backyard, heading for a small opening at the base of the wall. It was a hole Gooden had dug while playing hide-and-seek as a child, an unlikely escape route that was now their only hope. As he crawled through, Gooden heard the gate shatter, followed by his grandfather's defiant roar and the chaotic screams of the villagers. The sound cut through him like a knife, but Bai Sushi urged him forward, warning that they would be caught if they lingered. Gritting his teeth, he followed her into the cornfield, and together they fled toward the looming peaks of Black Dragon Mountain. The afternoon sun was sinking, casting long, jagged shadows that made the mountain look like a giant beast waiting to swallow them whole. We see them racing into the wilderness. Though Bai Sushi's injuries made her stumble, she refused to slow her frantic pace. She kept a tight grip on Gooden's hand as they navigated steep paths choked with thick weeds and sharp, grabbing thorns. The boy's clothes were torn and his arms bled from the scratches, but he felt no pain, only the echo of his grandfather's final words. After an hour of running, total darkness fell over the mountain, turning the woods into a void where one could barely see their own hand. Only a sliver of pale moonlight filtered through the canopy, accompanied by the relentless chirping of insects and the rustle of dead leaves. The occasional howl of an unknown predator made Gooden's skin crawl, until suddenly, Bai Sushi came to a sharp halt. She pointed toward a nearby valley and whispered that the dragon pool was just ahead. To be honest, it looked more like a trap than a sanctuary. The valley was a pitch-black maw from which the faint, rhythmic sound of flowing water drifted up through the cold air. A faint, sickly stench of rot hung in the breeze, enough to make anyone's stomach turn. And then, the silence was broken. Voices drifted from the shadows, certain that the white snake and Shui's grandson were heading straight for the pool. The pursuers plotted to catch them all at once, believing that killing the snake would finally allow the black dragon to emerge. The voices boasted of becoming founding heroes, dreaming of endless wealth and power under the Black Dragon's reign. They were certain Gooden and the White Snake were heading for the pool. Bai Sushi and Gooden exchanged a look of pure shock. It turned out the one who had ambushed her was none other than the village chief himself. He actually intended to release the Black Dragon. One of the men asked nervously if the beast might simply eat them all once it was freed. The chief kicked him, cursing his stupidity. He claimed his ancestors served the Black Dragon, and the beast had promised him a grand reward. If he broke the seal, he would be granted immortality. He would rule the village, and no one would ever dare look down on him again. Gooden felt a chill run down his spine. His grandfather had been right. The chief was a descendant of the Black Dragon's ancient demon slaves. He had waited his entire life for this moment. But Gooden wondered how the chief could have the blood of a guardian, as Bai Sushi had described. The chief wasn't part of the Qin family, so he shouldn't have possessed that sacred blood. Just then, the chief spoke again, his voice dripping with pride. He whispered that he had prepared for years. 3 years ago, he had lured Shui's unfilial son, Gooden's own father, into these very mountains. He had drained the man's blood to forge the soul-suppressing nails. A guardian's blood was the only thing capable of piercing a white snake's spirit. That was how he had managed to shatter her dragon core with a single strike. For Gooden, it felt as though a bolt of lightning had struck his mind. His father hadn't died from a ritual backlash at all. He had been murdered by the village chief. The truth was far more sinister than he imagined. The chief had used his father's blood to refine those cursed nails. Gooden felt the blood rush to his head, his entire body trembling with a sudden, violent rage. He clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms, the physical pain barely masking the tears of fury threatening to fall. Baisushi reached out and gripped his hand tightly. She shook her head, silently pleading with him to stay quiet and not do anything reckless. She knew that acting on impulse now would only lead to their certain death. The chief let out a cold laugh, calling the snake a toothless tiger now that her core was shattered. To him, she was no longer a threat. He brandished a black spirit blade given by the dragon, along with the remaining nails. One more strike, he claimed, and her soul would vanish forever. With a wave of his hand, he led his men into the valley, their torches flickering like dying stars against the darkness of the ravine. Only when their shadows and the light of their torches had completely faded did Baisushi finally release her hand from Gooden's mouth. Gooden could no longer hold back his tears. They fell freely as he gritted his teeth, his voice trembling with a violent intensity. The village chief had murdered his father, and he wanted blood. Baisushi reached out to wipe the tears from his face, her voice soft but firm. She told him she understood his hatred, but now was certainly not the time for impulse. With the soul-suppressing nails and the black spirit blade in the chief's hands, charging out now wouldn't just fail to bring revenge, it would cost them their lives. She urged that they enter the dragon pool first. Once her strength returned and her transformation was complete, neither the chief nor the black dragon would be a match for her. Gooden nodded, his jaw tight. Deep down, he knew she was right. After all, he was only a 13-year-old boy, hardly a match for a grown man. The chief also had 4 strong men with him. Gooden realized that only by waiting for Baisushi to recover could he hope to avenge his father and save his grandfather. And so, they moved forward. Baisushi took his hand, leading him cautiously into the depths of the valley toward the dragon pool. The valley was swallowed in a darkness far deeper than the forest outside, flanked by steep, jagged cliffs. As they walked, that foul, fishy stench grew increasingly unbearable. The smell made Gooden's head swim with nausea. In the silence, he could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of flowing water and a low, distant rumble. It sounded like thunder echoing from the deepest part of the ravine, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. It was the black dragon, sensing their arrival from below. His heart tightened, and he instinctively gripped her hand harder. After walking for nearly an hour, they finally reached the innermost sanctum of the valley. Before them lay a massive pool, roughly the size of half a basketball court. The water was pitch black, looking more like thick ink than anything found in nature. Not a single glimmer of light reflected off its surface. Surrounding the pool were dense, intricate carvings, the ancient patterns of the dragon-locking seal. Many of these sacred lines were now cracked and weathered, stained with a dark, oily grime that radiated a sickening, rotten odor. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, a grim reminder of how far the seal had deteriorated over the centuries. Gooden scanned the area but saw no sign of the chief or his men. There were no flickering torches, which, to be honest, was a rather unsettling development. They were likely hiding, waiting for the pair to expose themselves before launching an ambush. Baisushi's gaze swept the surroundings, her expression turning grave. She warned him to stay close and not wander, as the area was thick with the dragon's malice and the dangerous backlash of the failing seal. He nodded quickly, sticking to her side like a shadow. Baisushi led him to the very edge of the dragon pool and drew the town seal command from her robes. As she held it aloft, the medallion caught the moonlight and instantly erupted with a brilliant golden glow, illuminating the ancient patterns etched upon it. The path ahead began to brighten. As the medallion glowed, the ancient seals around the dragon pool ignited one by one, golden light spreading along the etched lines. The pitch-black water even began to shimmer with a faint white light, but at that exact moment, the surface suddenly erupted into massive waves. A jet of black water shot violently from the pool, aimed directly at Baisushi's face. Gooden let out a desperate shout of warning. He lunged forward and pushed Baisushi aside just in time. The black water bolt grazed her shoulder and slammed into the stone wall behind them. With a deafening boom, the wall shattered into a large hole, sending debris flying everywhere. Baisushi steadied herself, her expression shifting to one of alarm. She stared at the churning pool as a figure slowly rose from the dark depths, clutching a blade that shimmered with a greasy, black oil. It was the village chief, wearing a twisted, triumphant grin. His 4 henchmen also leaped out from behind nearby rocks, surrounding our pair. Armed with heavy hoes, they closed the circle. The chief, floating eerily upon the water, looked at Baisushi and noted that they had finally met again. He smiled smugly, admitting he knew she would eventually come to the dragon pool. He had been waiting there for quite some time. Baisushi shielded Gooden behind her, her eyes filled with a freezing coldness. She asked if he was the one who murdered Chen Mo 3 years ago. She accused him of being the one who ambushed her and interrupted her transformation. The chief laughed loudly, a sound of pure, unhinged arrogance. He confirmed it all, mocking Chen Shuyi for spending his life guarding a broken seal and looking down on him. He felt he had never been respected. His goal was to destroy the seal and release the black dragon. He wanted to kill the son, then the grandson, ensuring the Chun family line ended forever. He wanted the old man to live in eternal agony. Gooden, hearing this, trembled with a rage so intense it felt like he might shatter. The chief ranted that if not for the Chin family, his ancestors would never have been stuck in this desolate valley, looked down upon for generations. He believed that without them, he would have already achieved wealth and glory alongside the Black Dragon. To him, the Chins were the ultimate enemy. He suddenly raised the black blade and barked an order to his men to kill them. He wanted the boy chopped into pieces to feed the fish. As for the woman, he intended to capture her and personally drive the soul-suppressing nails through her heart. The four men charged forward with their weapons. Baisushi pushed Gooden back, and, in a blur of motion, a thick white mist erupted around her. In an instant, she returned to her true form. The massive white snake emerged, over 10 meters long with scales that shimmered like cold steel under the moonlight, her amber eyes fixed on the attackers. Driven by a wave of celestial fury, the massive white snake whipped her tail toward the four henchmen with a thunderous crack. The impact shattered the ground, sending stone fragments flying as the terrified men scrambled desperately to avoid being crushed. One was a second too slow. The tail swept him off his feet, slamming him into the cliffside where he went silent instantly. The remaining three turned pale and tried to flee, but at that moment, the village chief finally made his move. Clutching the black blade, he lunged from the water, aiming a lethal strike directly at the vital point of Baisushi's neck. The blade pulsed with a foul, bloody aura, clearly no ordinary weapon, forcing Baisushi to coil her body in a desperate defense. A metallic clang echoed as the blade struck her scales, sending sparks flying in every direction as the metal bit deep. She let out a pained hiss, her massive form shuddering as a deep gash appeared across her once pristine white scales. The black energy began to seep into her wound. He mocked her, noting that her dragon core was already shattered and powerless. The chief laughed maniacally, producing a dark, ominous object, one of the dreaded soul-suppressing nails he had mentioned earlier. He vowed to scatter her soul forever, raising the nail to plunge it directly into the great snake's head. Watching this, Gooden felt a rush of adrenaline. He forgot his fear, grabbed a heavy stone, and charged at the chief. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he smashed the rock against the back of the chief's head, the stone shattering on impact. The chief staggered, then turned slowly. His eyes were filled with a murderous rage, looking very much like a cornered beast. With a roar of fury, he swung the black blade toward the boy, the dark energy trailing behind the steel with terrifying speed. Gooden closed his eyes, certain that his life was over. To be honest, there was nowhere left for him to run. Instead of pain, he heard a pained hiss and the sound of heavy scales scraping against the stone floor. He opened his eyes to find Baisushi shielding him. The black blade was buried deep within her side, cutting through her flesh. Black blood hissed as it dripped onto the ground. Gooden cried out her name, tears streaming down his face in total despair. Her voice echoed weakly in his mind, urging him to run to the dragon pool and use his blood to activate the seal. Gooden refused to leave, crying out that he wouldn't abandon her, but Baisushi's voice echoed with a desperate urgency, telling him that if he died, everything would be lost, the village, his grandfather, and her. Just then, the chief violently wrenched the black blade free and raised the nail once more. As the soul-suppressing nail lunged toward Baisushi's head, Gooden's mind went blank, and he instinctively shoved his finger into his mouth. He bit down hard, and blood immediately began to flow. He remembered Baisushi telling him that his blood carried the lineage of the town guardian. This pure young blood could purify evil, nourish her dragon core, and activate the seal. Without hesitation, he pressed his bleeding finger against the carvings. The moment his blood touched the stone, the ancient patterns surrounding the dragon pool erupted into a blinding, golden radiance. Countless beams of golden light shot out from the ground like a massive web, instantly ensnaring the village chief within its glowing threads. The chief let out a blood-curdling scream as the light bound him, the evil aura on his body dissolving into plumes of thick, white smoke. The soul-suppressing nail and the black blade fell to the ground with a heavy clang. He stammered in disbelief, unable to accept that a 13-year-old boy could possibly activate the Great Guardian Seal. He roared and struggled like a madman, but the golden threads only pulled tighter. The pressure was so intense it felt as though his bones would shatter. Even Gooden stood frozen in shock at the power he had unleashed. Suddenly, the waters of the dragon pool began to churn into massive, towering waves as a soft white light lifted Baisushi's body into the air. Within that light, her serpentine form began to transform. A pair of coral-like dragon horns slowly emerged from the top of her head. For sharp dragon claws sprouted from her body, and her snow-white scales shifted, now shimmering with intricate golden patterns. Her once 10-meter-long body grew larger and more majestic as dark clouds gathered overhead, crackling with thunder and violet lightning. The lightning struck the air above the pool, shaking the entire valley. This was the heavenly tribulation. Baisushi was finally ascending to dragonhood. From the center of the pool, she let out a dragon's roar that echoed through the mountains, a sound so clear and majestic it carried an absolute authority. The oppressive, evil aura in the valley was instantly swept away by the sound. Trapped in the golden web, the chief's face turned a ghostly pale. He muttered to himself that it was impossible for her to transform now, before screaming out for someone named Lord Heijiao to save him. He shrieked toward the depths of the pool in a total frenzy. And it was at that very moment, at the bottom of the dragon pool. Suddenly, an earth-shattering roar erupted from below, filled with endless brutality and rage, as the entire dragon pool instantly turned pitch black. A wave of monstrous evil energy surged from the depths, striking directly toward Sushi in the sky. Heijiao was finally emerging. Sushi swung her body mid-air, letting out another dragon's cry as a silver white dragon's breath erupted from her mouth, colliding with that black, evil energy. With a deafening boom, the entire valley felt as if it were collapsing, rocks tumbling from the cliffs. Gooden was sent flying by the shockwave, hitting the ground so hard his vision went dark, nearly losing consciousness. When he finally recovered, he saw a silver-white dragon and a black giant flood dragon locked in a fierce struggle. The white dragon was Sushi, and the black one was Heijiao, sealed for 1,000 years. Heijiao's body was even larger than Sushi's, covered in black scales emitting a thick, evil aura, his blood red eyes burning with murderous intent. His massive claws lunged at Sushi repeatedly, having only just transformed. Her body wasn't yet stable, and with her existing injuries, she was simply no match for Heijiao. After a few rounds, Heijiao's claw struck her body. With a pained dragon's cry, she fell from the sky, crashing heavily beside the dragon's stone. Gooden screamed her name and scrambled to his feet to run to her, but at that moment, Heijiao's massive head emerged from the pool. Those blood-red eyes locked onto the boy, and as he opened his cavernous maw, a blast of black energy sprayed toward him. Frozen in terror, Gooden couldn't move, but at the critical moment, a streak of golden light rushed from the valley entrance to shield him. That golden light came from a bagua mirror. He turned his head and saw his grandfather. The old man stood at the entrance, holding the mirror, his clothes tattered and his body covered in blood, with a long, deep gash across his face. It was a sight that would haunt anyone, to be honest. Grandfather let out a great shout, throwing several yellow talismans into the air, which instantly ignited into golden flames and flew toward Heijiao. However, the moment they touched the evil aura, the flames were extinguished. Heijiao turned, his head, his blood-red eyes fixing on Grandfather with a furious roar as his massive tail swung toward the old man. Grandfather threw himself forward as I screamed for him to be careful, but his face paled as he realized he couldn't dodge in time. Just then, Sushi lunged from the ground, her jaws clamping onto Heijiao's tail with a ferocious grip before she violently swung Heijiao's massive body away, slamming him into the cliffside. Shinshui, take Gooden and go. I'll hold him off, she shouted to Grandfather, her voice carrying a heavy sense of finality. No, you've just transformed. You're no match for him, he yelled back. I am the spirit vein of this dragon-locking formation, Sushi cried out. To break it, he must kill me first. She charged at Heijiao once more, and we see the two creatures locked in a desperate struggle as Grandfather watched, teeth gritting. Suddenly, he turned to me with a look of grim determination. Gooden, listen to me, he said, kneeling down to face the boy. He gripped my shoulders, looking me straight in the eye as he spoke each word with heavy weight. This formation requires a blood sacrifice. Only the blood of a guardian can fully activate its true power. Your great-grandfather used his blood back then, and now it is my turn. My heart sank as I realized his intent, and I threw my arms around him, sobbing for him not to do it. I begged him not to die, insisting we find another way without a sacrifice. Silly child, he whispered, patting my head with a smile. Tears escaped the corners of his eyes. I am old. I've guarded this place my whole life. It's time I did one last thing for the village. Remember, from now on, you are the guardian. Live well, protect this village, and protect yourself. With that, Grandfather pushed me away and drew his peachwood sword, slicing his palm open in one swift motion. Blood began to pour instantly. He pressed his bleeding palm against the runes on the ground, chanting an ancient incantation that sounded like nothing I'd ever heard. As he spoke, the runes across the entire valley erupted in a golden light 10 times brighter than before, blinding in its intensity. Countless beams of golden light shot up from the earth, merging into a massive golden sword that pierced straight toward Heijiao. Heijiao let out a scream of pure agony as the golden blade struck home, black blood spraying from his body and soaking the ground. The evil aura surrounding him was instantly purified by the light. His body wavered before crashing down from the sky into the dragon pool. Seizing the moment, Sushi hovered over the pool and unleashed a final, devastating blast of silver-white dragon's breath. The breath poured into the dragon pool, causing every rune within it to ignite instantly. We see a brilliant golden light begin to envelop the entire pool, sealing it tight. From the depths, Heijiao's frantic roars echoed upward, though the sound grew more distant by the second. The cries weakened until they vanished entirely. The seal was reinforced, and at last, it was over. The dark clouds in the sky began to scatter, allowing the moon to emerge once more and cast its pale white light. The valley's evil aura had vanished, leaving behind only the the faint, metallic scent of blood. Sushi descended from the air, returning to her human form as she landed beside the boy. Her face remained pale, yet her eyes now held a new sense of majesty, and her wounds were mostly healed. But Gooden didn't notice. He ran like the wind to reach his grandfather's side. The old man lay on the ground, his face deathly white, his lifeblood nearly spent. His breath was so faint it could barely be felt. Gooden knelt on the ground, cradling the old man and sobbing uncontrollably, begging him to wake up. Slowly, grandfather opened his eyes. He looked at the boy and managed a faint, weary smile. He reached up to touch Gooden's face, but his hand fell limp halfway there. "Gooden, I'm sorry." His voice was as faint as a whisper. "Live well, protect the village." But Gooden cried out that he didn't want him to die. He wanted him to live, to make him brown sugar rice cakes again. He screamed and shook the old man desperately, but grandfather's eyes slowly drifted shut. His hand fell completely, and his breathing stopped. Gooden sat on the ground, clutching the cold body of his grandfather, shaking with grief as his entire world seemed to collapse in an instant. Sushi walked over and gently placed a hand on his back. The village was eerily quiet. The residents stood along the roads, watching them pass with faces full of guilt and unease. They finally knew the truth, the village chief's conspiracy, and how grandfather had sacrificed himself to save them all. They buried the old man at the foot of Black Dragon Mountain, right beside great-grandfather. As for the village chief, he had lost his mind, his brain damaged by the formation's light. Now, he sits daily under the old locust tree, mumbling about Lord Heijiao. The villagers eventually locked him away, and no one spared him a second thought. Peace returned to the village, but for Gooden, the world was emptier. He became the new guardian of the seal. To be honest, it was a heavy burden for a child. The villagers treated him with great respect, but he found no joy in it. Every day, he visited grandfather's grave to burn incense and talk to him. He promised to protect the village and live a good life. Sushi stayed by his side, living in his home and looking after his daily needs. Just as she had promised, she stayed to be his wife once he grew up. The villagers, now fully aware of her presence, felt nothing but gratitude. No one called her a rebellious dragon anymore. They simply called her Lady Bai. As the days turned into weeks, life seemed to return to normal, but deep down, Gooden felt something was wrong. On the night Heijiao was sealed, he thought he heard a voice echoing inside his head. The memory of that voice was deep and raspy, carrying a sinister, mocking laughter. Then there was the snakescale mark on his lower abdomen. Originally a silvery white, it had recently begun turning a deep, ink black, throbbing with a dull ache every single night. It felt cold, as if something were trying to crawl out from within him. When he asked Sushi, she claimed it was just a normal reaction to the blood energy. She told him he would be fine once he grew up, but he couldn't shake the feeling she was lying. One night, he woke up to find her gone. Finding her room empty, he walked to the window and saw her standing in the yard, her back to him, staring toward Black Dragon Mountain. She held the dragon-suppressing token, murmuring something under her breath. As the moonlight bathed her, we see something truly unsettling. A faint, dark shadow flickered behind her, a shadow with massive dragon horns, looking exactly like the monstrous Heijiao. At that exact moment, a deep voice suddenly hissed in his ear, sounding identical to the one he had heard on the night of the sealing. "Little fellow, thank you for helping me reinforce the seal." The voice chuckled with a bone-chilling coldness that seemed to freeze the air. "Otherwise, I never could have used the spirit vein's power to break these final shackles. We will meet very soon." The hair on Gooden's neck stood up. He spun around instantly, looking everywhere, but the courtyard remained eerily silent. There was nothing there. Sushi, hearing his movement, turned around and looked at him with a gentle, radiant smile, beckoning him over. "Gooden, why are you awake?" she asked softly. "Go back to bed. The night air is chilly." Standing there in the moonlight, she still looked like a beautiful, delicate young woman with a kind gaze. Yet, looking at her, Gooden felt a shiver run down his spine as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He suddenly remembered his grandfather's final words. The old man had said, "I'm sorry." Why would he apologize? And then there was Sushi's claim of being the manifestation of the spirit vein. If she were the spirit vein, why was she so easily pierced by a soul-suppressing nail? And why, during her transformation, could Heijiao break the seal so easily? Why had she never acted against the village chief despite having the power to kill him? And what really happened that night in the valley? He remembered the dragon's roar from the moment Heijiao was sealed in the dragon pool. It had sounded, strangely enough, as if it contained a hint of laughter. A flood of questions suddenly rushed into Gooden's mind as he looked at Sushi, who was still standing in the yard smiling at him so tenderly. He realized then that this ordeal was far from over. In fact, it seemed he had fallen into a massive trap the very moment he was bitten. But who was the true mastermind behind the curtain? Was it the crazed village chief, the sealed Heijiao, or perhaps someone even closer to home? Could it be Sushi herself, the woman who promised to stay and be his wife? As the night wind carried the chill of Black Dragon Mountain into the yard, Gooden stood by the window, bathed in moonlight and shivering with a cold that went bone deep. He knew then that the real story was only just beginning.